So with that, go ahead and get started here. What we're going to talk about today, like I said, is housing in the SEDS. How are EDDs approaching housing, which has kind of commonly been seen as a community development issue through the frame of the comprehensive economic development strategy. So I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then at the end of this, I really want to open it up to everyone on the call and just have an open conversation about what you're doing in this area for the SEDS process. So I think the best thing we can do is present some best practices and then let everyone kind of discuss what they're doing. And when we registered, you did submit or asked you to submit, how are you thinking about housing during your SEDS process? So we've got a lot of good information there that I'll be able to share out as well. So with that, here we go. I don't think I need to tell anyone on this call that there's a national housing affordability and accessibility crisis. So when we're talking about the national housing affordability and accessibility crisis, that means we're seeing it across the country. But the issues are manifesting with different problems in different regions. So just the same as every region has different economic challenges based on the context and the history and the industries that are prevalent in that region, the same thing holds for housing, right? Everybody has different growth priorities, different relationships with developers. Everybody has different approaches to housing that lead to housing challenges being unique in every single region. So national problem, but every single locality, community is facing different things. So in thinking about some of these common challenges, we've ran across a lot of these in just getting feedback from folks about what's happening in their region. So really, fast growing economic hubs, your urban centers of states and regions, they're really struggling to keep pace with economic and community growth, population growth, and fast growing either tech hubs or capital cities or your kind of urban centers. The same kind of holds for tourism towns, towns that are heavily reliant on outdoor recreation and tourism. They're really, having a lot of issues with new housing starts not keeping pace with the rest of the economy and the rest of the regional growth. What may be more common across NATO membership and across the EDD COP is the stagnant, declining, and aging regional populations. Those kind of regions where particularly in rural areas, there's just substandard housing and blight conditions that lead to a whole host of problems for communities. With that, the aging regional population question really comes to play. My personal experience working at a regional organization, we had a very fast slightly declining, stagnant population growth region. As well as the compounding issue of aging populations and what happens to those properties whenever those people pass away. With that, the appraisal gap is kind of a fancy term, but I'm sure you've all experienced this in rural communities. It's just simply is the cost of construction is outpacing expected sale price. So you can't really expect private developers to be motivated to come to a community or to a region if the expected sell price at the end of their construction is vastly lower than the cost of new construction. And talking to lots of experts in the field, National Association of Home Builders, several other organizations, that price to build is just growing and growing based on different labor costs or different supply chain issues and things like that. And they really haven't seen a slowdown in those pricing inputs for new construction of housing. And in rural regions, where, new houses, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, kind of traditionally called a starter house, would be, priced anywhere from $120,000 to $180,000. That new construction just really can't happen for that price. So, the capital stack isn't there. Developers aren't willing to come in for that price. So we're seeing that a lot in rural regions, which is a very, very big problem. And on the same note, in some more, urban areas and even in some rural places, the cost of securing housing, whether that's renting, owning, whatever it is, that price is not out far outpacing, traditional worker wages, average worker wages in rural communities. So you're seeing recruitment challenges across local industries that just really haven't been there before, where your economy wants to grow and you've got some good momentum with maybe a new manufacturing site in town, or a new university campus opening up, or some kind of momentum, but you really can't find folks that want to that are able to put down roots in a community, simply because they're not able to secure housing that's appropriate for them. And I don't have to tell anyone on this call anything about federal or state housing investments being spread too far and too thin. That's just the nature of our game, right? We have to do a lot with not very much, and that itself causes a lot of issues. But we may be seeing some momentum later that I'll talk about in terms of adequately meeting the federal and state housing investment need that's there. So talking about all of those things, we're trying to tee up this idea that housing is obviously a natural component of regional economic success and growth. So whenever you see some of these housing challenges manifest, you see stagnating growth, like I said, core workforce is pushed out of communities. People can't afford to live there, they leave. That's the simple nature of it. And in a recent report, I believe from the Northern Kentucky Area Development District, they really tied in that effect of, they want people like their kids, their grandchildren, to be able to live and work and find both housing and jobs in their communities, so that they don't have to then leave whenever they turn 18, or whenever they turn 22, or receive some sort of work certification that pushes them out of the community. With that, of course, brain drain, similar ideas there. And really an interesting one that we're starting to see more and more is communities losing out on site selection opportunities because of inadequate housing options, where a company wants to come to a certain community because it's a industry ready site, got a decent workforce available in the community, but they are looking more and more at the housing market conditions and seeing, okay, if we're paying this certain rate for this this position, are those people going to be able to find housing that's not an hour, 2 hour commute in and out of the area, which is a newer thing. It's definitely something we're seeing companies start to take a closer look at whenever they're conducting their site selection process. So without housing, you may not be able to land that refrigeration company at your local industrial park. So we're seeing more and more of that happening across the country. And with that, less vibrant communities. If the people who make your community what it is aren't able to afford to live there, they'll leave. It's as simple as that. This is an issue that is tied intrinsically in with economic and community growth. So really, what is the regional role? And I stole the graphic from myself on the left that came from our Solving the Housing Puzzle presentation and webinar and microsite that you can find on the NADO website. But we've really seen regional organizations and EDDs take on kind of 4 key areas, plus the CEDS, which we're going to talk about today. So the first area is simple. The bread and butter of regional economic development organizations is planning. Conducting housing strategies, conducting plans for their communities to be able to boost housing affordability and accessibility. We've also seen some interesting ideas in the other meaning of the word planning, of some regional organizations even taking on a planning commission type role, where they're reviewing building permits, providing zoning and code enforcement and ordinance work for rural communities within their region. So some really interesting, great stuff going on there. With that, the next section is obviously land management. There's been a lot of buzz about land banks, land trusts, and what role those organizations can kind of play in boosting housing affordability in their region. And we do have some resources on the NADO website as well, built around how can regional organizations kind of stand up, either regional or local land bank, and kind of work with those community partners to figure out kind of best solutions for those tactics. With that, again, financial, kind of a natural role for EDDs. is managing funds, dispersing different grant opportunities, or managing housing RLFs, which we've seen some great examples from across the country of organizations using the RLF model, revolving funds around based on an initial seed start, and using some of those funds to construct affordable housing in their region. So really kind of taking a central role in producing new houses. And the development role, of course, kind of ties right into the financier. Some organizations are out there just building houses, simple as that, which is something I was very surprised to hear about as I was conducting my research into this topic. But they really, some organizations aren't waiting on the sideline for developers to come into their region. They're not going out and recruiting folks. They're saying, okay, we're going to handle this ourselves. And in all of this past research I've done, really kind of a central question has come up is, okay, how does the CEDS fit into this? The CEDS is the most universal thing for EDDs. Everyone does one, and housing is becoming a universal issue for everyone. So how are regional organizations kind of reacting to this pressure from their communities saying, hey, this is an issue for us. We need to reflect this in our economic development strategies because it is a central aspect to economic growth and success. So how does housing fit into the CEDS? I'm going to go through several examples after a couple more slides and kind of talk through some of these ideas. But really, it comes down to these kind of four main points that we've seen EDDs incorporate housing into the CEDS. So obviously, when you conduct your summary background or any CEDS stakeholder surveys or any public engagement or outreach, you're obviously going to get feedback saying housing affordability is an issue. That's going to be a given. I think everyone on this call, if you conducted a CEDS survey today and went out there, I think housing affordability would be in the top 5 issue areas expressed by your communities, no matter where you are. With that, the next bullet point, collecting data and information. So we're seeing more and more, housing data being incorporated into the CEDS to kind of drive that strategy and decision-making process. So we'll go into a few examples as well after this, so you can kind of see how regions are kind of presenting that information. And then 3 and 4, again, kind of bread and butter of EDDs in the CEDS process, right? You need to have something that happens because of the work you're doing. It can't just be plans on the paper, and it can't just be something that goes on the shelf. It has to be there has to be strategies that is clear, actionable, measurable, and assignable. So clear in that everyone is familiar with what's going to happen. Actionable, there's a tangible action that needs to be taken. Measurable, how are you going to see if you've been successful? And assignable, who's going to do it in the region, and are they willing to commit to specific actions taken as a part of the CEDS process, as part of implementation. With that, there's been lots of questions we've gotten as well about how does EDA feel about housing. The message we've gotten back from EDA has always been they do not fund housing, right? They do not conduct any sort of housing surveys or provide any housing development opportunities using either public works economic adjustment assistance or any of the regional or national competitions. What they do recommend, though, is that housing is incorporated into the CEDS. So if you look at the current CEDS content guidelines, there's a few places that stand out to me of where housing is kind of mentioned. And we can kind of talk through what that actually means for you on the ground. The first bullet point there, I kind of cut off the rest of the bullet points, but the top of that basically says, what should EDDs talk about in the CEDS? And it says other factors that relate to economic performance, such as housing, health and services, educational, cultural, recreational resources. So, that's just an obvious given that the CEDS has to incorporate some element of housing if the EDD feels that impacts the economic performance of their region, which it naturally does. The next point is really talking about plan integration. So how are you working with the existing planning that's happening in your region, whether it's your organization conducting the planning, or if it's cities conducting their own land use planning or their own transportation planning or housing planning. Take a look at those try to figure out how those strategies that are being promoted in existing planning, what does that mean for the region? And how does that kind of incorporate any of that into the CEDS process? The next bullet point is really talking about that implementation piece, the action plan. So they list housing in there as a potential use, or potential area for the action plan, alongside transportation, broadband, environmental. So, we've seen a lot of this stuff before. This isn't new necessarily, but just to give you an idea of what EDA has actually said about housing and the CEDS. So what could be on the horizon? So last week, we saw the Departments of Commerce and Justice and Science and related agencies fiscal year 26 appropriations bill come out of the Senate committee. This is listed on page 20 of the bill if you wanted to take a look at how EDA might be affected by some of the new appropriations talks going on. Overall, a positive, generally positive, assessment of EDA, I think, in terms of some of the powers or things it's asking EDA to do. And one of those things is a section asking EDA to recognize that economic development and job creation will not benefit residents unless there is sufficient housing supply. So I'm not going to read that whole paragraph to everyone here, but there's some really great encouraging stuff, I think, that would allow EDDs to take on the role that they're meant to and the role that communities are asking them to take. So one main thing is they mentioned consider prioritizing jurisdictions that have removed land use and zoning barriers to housing production in discretionary grants, including the PUIAs and the recompetes. As well as the last sentence there, if you read it, within 90 days of enactment of this act, the committee directs EDA to provide an update on ways EDA funds can support housing supply and land use deregulation priorities. So that's really what we're seeing that could be a possibility for EDDs in the future as you're working through the CEDS process. But again, this is not a final bill or a recommendation at this point. This is just an idea of what might be coming down the tube. I believe we still have to go through House, the U.S. House review in their own bill, and they have to, kind of marry the two. But this could be on the horizon for EDDs. So it's definitely something to keep track of as you're kind of looking at how you're incorporating housing into the CEDS process. So a lot of this language, I think, is really positive for EDDs. So I think this could be an interesting time, to say the least. And I'm seeing the chat. Yes, the recording is taking place. So thanks for the reminder. So now I'm going to talk just kind of about some of the different examples. So I've gone through probably 100 or 150 CEDS over the past month and putting together this presentation, trying to find kind of the best examples I can about how folks are using or incorporating housing into the CEDS. And I always appreciate reading CEDS because it gives you, I think, a great understanding of specific strategies that you can take away and incorporate into your CEDS planning process. So the first example, and I apologize if you see your own organization listed here and you feel a little bit embarrassed, but example is Yuba Sutter EDC in Northern California. Through their summary background and CEDS stakeholder process, they obviously, like I said, everyone identifies, affordable housing challenges and inadequate housing supply as some of the biggest challenges and threats through the SWOT or whatever framework you use. Another example, Area 15, RPC in Iowa. This is their priority rankings of their SWOT analysis and the feedback they got from their communities. You can see right at the top on both sections, weaknesses and threats, deteriorated housing, lack of affordable housing, and then you look down and it's lack of affordable housing there and a threat as well, and a lack of population growth. So really some clear examples of how they're presenting this information as a regional priority. The next section is kind of talking about the data collection that we talked about earlier. How are EDDs who are very familiar with collecting data, very familiar with presenting and using data to prioritize strategies for economic development in their regions, how are they using this data and presenting it during their CEDS process. So an example I pulled out here is the Atlanta Regional Commission. They're tracking, this is only just a very small section of their housing and data process, which is really, really cool section. I encourage you to check it out. But they went through and identified all the member communities in their region and said, okay, what type of action is happening in here? And you can see across the board, a reflection of those community contexts. So for example, just a thought, obviously city of Atlanta, you're going to have more multifamily permits naturally in an urban core. And then you move right next down to the Cherokee County, which is a very rural county, I believe on the southern side of the Atlanta metro. And naturally, that's going to show much more suburban sprawl, more single family housing being developed. And only out of 2196 single family building permits issued, only 30 multifamily. So that really displays some of the priorities of the communities that you're working at. So this whole slide is really just to show, different unique ways that folks are incorporating some of the housing data that they're collecting and how they're portraying it, showing that there are changing contexts, changing demands, changing strategies that are needed across a region. There's no, one strategy that's going to work for regional organizations that they can just implement across all of their cities and counties and say, this is how we're going to fix housing. You really have to boil down into the data and see, like you can see here in the city of Atlanta and Cherokee County, how is the context of your communities impacted, or how does that impact your the strategies you ultimately recommend? And the second example is Southwest Louisiana RPC, located around the Lake Charles region in Southwest Louisiana. They had several of these bullet points. I say bullet points, but maybe house points would be a better way to say it. For each of their communities and counties, showing homeowner vacancy rates, rental vacancies, housing units, occupied housing units, gross rent, median mortgage, building permits issued, just to give everyone kind of a snapshot of what's happening in their region. And then you can go and dive in further and say, okay, in this community, we have a homeowner vacancy rate of 2.1%. But if we look out over into this community, their homeowner vacancy rate is 10 or 15%. So really using some of those tools that you already have access to, the Americans Community Survey, different HUD data sets, and we'll talk about a few later that I would recommend folks use. The last example in the data collection section is Southern Tier West Regional Planning and Development Board in New York. This comes out of their 2021 and 2026 sets. So really just showing, again, across the board or across the top, you can see breaking down county by county and looking at all of these factors that contribute to housing markets. And then once you have this information, that's when you can really start making action plans and developing strategies for your communities. So all of this information is available in the ACS surveys data set. So really, this is an easy plug and play opportunity right here for you to really understand what's happening in your region. Moving into the next section, the action plan, and I believe Leo Pretty's on the call as well, so I may call on you later to talk a little bit about the River Valley CEDS. But the first example on the left is something I wanted to bring up as an example of how folks are making that connection between housing and economic development. So they pulled the housing commuting patterns of their region, showing where people live, where do they work, and what does that mean for not only regional housing strategies, but what does that mean for transportation strategies? How are people moving around the region? And the connection between, your house and your work is the most often traveled thing you do probably, or your commute, So it's highly important that these things are examined as a part of the CEDS process. So that leads me into kind of this next part is the action plan. So what are you going to do about the things that you come up with? You've looked at the data, you've sourced community engagement, you've sourced feedback from everyone. What are you actually going to do now? So with that, this is just kind of a basic example of kind of a breakdown of an action plan. And this, you can see at the top, is the objective is improve housing stock. And they added I think, helpful kind of prioritization, with the fires. Is this a 4-alarm fire? Is this a 3-alarm fire, 2-alarm, 1-alarm? You can kind of see how they estimated not only the priority based on feedback from communities, based on the data they collected, but also what's the kind of the time to complete. So like, is it like a 4 alarm fire? Are you going to only have a short amount of time to complete this? Is this a real priority of the community? And then you can kind of work through some of those different strategies that you've developed and make that prioritization. My next example here is North Country Council in New Hampshire. We recently did a webinar that you may have been on or seen the recording of, highlighting this example actually. So this may be kind of news to everyone else, but North Country Council has done a really great job of incorporating housing and human services elements into their CEDS. And you can see on the left there, they conducted a housing needs analysis through their New Hampshire Department of New Hampshire Housing that really kind of boiled down and gave them a lot of great input and data sets that they could then use to build out their CEDS process. There's also some cool graphics that I think are really important, again, in displaying that connection between housing and economic development. Is the recipients of pathways to home ownership work in a variety of fields, right? You have to have every single element, every single occupation on this list here in order to have a functioning community and in order to have a thriving community. So they went through some of their information about their Pathways to Homeownership program, pulled that information about folks who were using that loan program and included that in their CEDS process. So really cool examples, I think, just again, connecting housing to economic development and to economic success in the region. Talking a little bit more about North Country Council and AHEAD Incorporated, which is their nonprofit partner in all of this. Through their CEDS process, they've actually been able to go in and start implementing some of the things they talked about. So the CEDS was kind of this community event, basically, of like figuring out what's happening and how and what everyone's going to do about it. So some of the results of these conversations, and I've linked to the NADO webinar as well to give just a little bit more information and context about that, some of the implementation aspects they've done. But they're able to put together $8.8 million housing development fund for the region, building low to mod income housing for folks, as well as their partnership sustainability grants for AHEAD and North Country Council. The development of the low interest development loan program, which was and also the Pathways to Homeownership down payment assistance program that I mentioned earlier. So with that, they also were able to go in and go through the CEDS process and identify their priorities. And one of those was a new child care facility for their region and used Northern Border Regional Commission funds to do that. And that's, again, just another example of how the conversations that happen in the CEDS can be kind of actually lead to a project, right? With that, kind of wrapping up here, just going through some of the different things that we've been able to put out. I've mentioned a few of these during the presentation, but would highly encourage you to check out our nado.org/housing URL. And all of this information is on that website, where you can see two of my favorite examples personally is the Western Piedmont COGS Regional Housing Growth Toolkit, and then the How to Build a Regional Housing Land Bank. So highly encourage everyone to check that out. And also check out the webinar, Rural Housing Solutions. That was a great webinar and presentation from Rick Hunsaker from Region 12 COG in Iowa, talking about some of the housing development work they've done, as well as Eric Yost, who's one of the senior program managers at HUD, who has worked in their community development and research office for some time and really ran through a lot of great HUD opportunities and funding and technical assistance opportunities that HUD provides. Some of the other data sources that I mentioned I would share earlier, definitely take a look at some of these and try to figure out how you can incorporate some of this information about your region into your CEDS process. I think you could get just mounds and mounds and mounds of data from all of these sources. So really, the Public and Affordable Housing Research Corporation put together a great one, that their federally assisted housing preservation dashboard showing where the federally owned housing units are in your region, and really kind of using that as a core asset for building out more low to moderate income housing. With that, National Association of Realtors, state MSA data, that's just the a little bit of the gold standard there. It's great stuff, as well as Housing Assistance Council in the bottom left. Their Rural Data Central they just released a few months ago that provides county by county information in all of those fields that we talked about earlier in the data collection. So definitely check those places out. And another new publication that I would highly recommend everyone on this call go through and just scan through and read. The Drexel University, their NOAC Metro Finance Lab, which has partnered with NADO on some different things here and there over the years, as well as Accelerator for America released their state and local housing action plan through their National Housing Crisis Task Force project. This is, I think, one of the best housing resources that's been put out in years. It's extremely, clear, extremely specific about what actions can be taken at the local level to kind of boost affordable housing. And this is something you can share, with all of your member communities and showing, okay, here's your strategy book. This has specific, clear, actionable strategies in here that if you really want to get serious about housing and addressing, affordable housing issues, this is kind of the book for us. And I did want to flag again, we are doing kind of a back-to-back NADO afternoon of housing-related programming at 3 p.m. Eastern today, 2 p.m. Central. We are hosting the shared equity housing homeownership options that can help your community meet its affordable needs. So we have about 25 minutes till that call kicks off, but highly recommend going on our website and registering for that event as well, so you can get on there when this call wraps up. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop presenting. We do have a lot of time here if we need.